Aisha Thompson stood in front of the Bennett Enterprises tower, the cold January wind of 2010 in Chicago cutting through her thin coat like invisible blades. At 24, she was a high school literature teacher who had just moved to the city to start a new life. But now, she stood there, heart pounding, clutching 3 pregnancy tests in her purse. 3 different brands, 3 identical results. She was pregnant. Pregnant with the child of James Bennett, the man who had stolen her heart entirely over the past 6 months. A white American tech billionaire, CEO of Bennett Tech, a man who once made her believe love could conquer all boundaries. Aisha took a deep breath, exhaling tiny clouds in the frigid air. She pushed the revolving glass door open and stepped into the grand marble lobby, where people in expensive suits hurried past with practiced urgency. The sound of her high heels echoed across the floor. Too loud, too revealing, as if exposing her anxiety. 6 months ago, when James first invited her to dinner after a tutoring session with his niece, she had felt just as out of place. But his smile, warm, sincere, with those sparkling blue eyes, had made her forget their differences. He, a 30-year-old billionaire, and she, a teacher from a poor neighborhood in Detroit. "I'm here to see James Bennett," Aisha said to the receptionist, trying to keep her voice steady. "Aisha Thompson, I have an appointment." With sleek blonde hair and a professional smile, the receptionist typed on her computer, then glanced at Aisha, her eyes sweeping over the modest dress and hastily tied curls. 32nd floor, she said coldly. "Mr. Bennett's assistant will meet you at the elevator." Aisha stepped into the empty elevator, her heart pounding harder as the floor numbers climbed. She rehearsed what she would say. "James, I'm pregnant. This wasn't planned, but we've been together for 6 months. We can do this." She remembered their moments together. Michelin-starred dinners, private helicopter flights to his lakefront estate in Michigan. The nights he whispered, "You're special," into her ear. She believed their love was real. Even if his world was full of unspoken rules she could never fully understand. The elevator chimed softly as it opened. A middle-aged woman with tightly pinned hair and thin steel-framed glasses was waiting. She said, "Miss Thompson, please follow me," leading Aisha down a hallway lined with awards and articles praising James Bennett, Fortune's 40 under 40, Forbes's tech pioneer. Aisha felt small, but reminded herself, "He loves me. That's what matters." The assistant knocked on a large door and announced, "Ms. Thompson is here, Mr. Bennett." Aisha stepped inside. The door shut behind her. James sat behind a massive glass desk, sunlight flooding through the windows, with Chicago sprawling like a living painting behind him. He didn't look up, his fingers tapping away on the keyboard. "1 minute," he said coolly. Aisha stood near the door, clutching her purse, feeling like an outsider in his world. The office was minimalist but expensive. Glass, steel, black leather. Only one photo on the desk. James shaking hands with the governor at a tech conference. Finally, James looked up, his eyes devoid of warmth, only cold assessment. "Aisha, what's so urgent it couldn't wait until tonight?" She stepped forward, voice trembling. "I thought this needed to be said in person." James leaned back in his chair, visibly impatient. "I have a board meeting in 40 minutes. What is it?" Aisha summoned all her courage, pulled out the 3 pregnancy tests from her bag, and laid them on the glass table between them. "I'm pregnant, James." Silence. A heavy silence, as if all the air had been sucked from the room. James stared at the tests, then at her, his gaze hardening. "Are you sure they're mine?" The question hit Aisha like a punch to the chest. She stepped back, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. "Of course they're yours. How could you even ask that?" James stood and walked to the bar in the corner of the office, pouring himself a glass of expensive whiskey, the same kind he once taught her how to savor. He didn't offer her any. "We were always careful," he said coldly. "This shouldn't have happened. This is a mistake, Aisha." The word mistake cut like a blade. She shook her head. "Mistake? James, we've been together for 6 months. You introduced me to your family, took me to your company's Christmas party." He interrupted sharply, his eyes piercing. "You were someone I dated. Yes. Not someone I'd build a family with. Do you think someone like me would choose someone like you, a teacher from Ohio struggling with rent, to stand beside me in Chicago's elite circles?" His words stabbed into Aisha's heart. She froze, unable to believe the man who once said he loved her had turned into a stranger. "Someone like me?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. James sighed as if explaining to a child. "You're ordinary, Aisha. Sweet, but not the kind of woman I need for the long run. I have an IPO in 3 months and plan to marry the daughter of a media CEO next year. Would you give all that up for you?" Aisha felt the floor fall out from under her. She wanted to cry, but told herself not to break down before him. "I don't want your money," she said firmly. James opened a drawer, pulled out a checkbook, and scribbled quickly. $100,000, he said, tearing out the check and holding it out. "Use it to care for this, or raise the child somewhere else. I don't care, but don't involve my name." Aisha stared at the check, a wave of nausea rising in her chest. "What were we to you?" she asked, voice choked. James shrugged. "Have a good time. It's over." James pressed a button on his desk when she didn't take the check. "Laura, call security. Ms. Thompson is ready to leave." Aisha stared in disbelief. "You're having me escorted out by security?" James didn't respond, his eyes back on the computer screen. 2 men in black suits entered. One gently but firmly took her arm. "Ms. Thompson, this way, please." Aisha let them guide her back to the elevator, the pregnancy tests still on James's desk, left behind like discarded trash. In the elevator, she watched the numbers descend, holding back tears. In the lobby, she walked past the curious eyes of the receptionist and out into the cold, where the wind slapped her face. She went to a nearby alley, leaned against the rough brick wall, and finally let the tears fall. She cradled her belly, where a small life was growing. "I won't let you be hurt," she whispered. She looked up at the towering Bennett Enterprises building, rising like a symbol of power. "You think I'm ordinary, James?" she said, her voice steady even as the tears kept coming. "But I'll prove you wrong. I'll make it, for this child and myself." Aisha Thompson sat on a hard plastic chair in the cramped waiting room of Cook County Clinic, her hands clutching an old handbag on her lap. The scent of antiseptic mixed with crying children and scattered conversations, creating a chaotic hum that made her feel suffocated. It had been 2 months since James Bennett, her billionaire lover, had coldly rejected her in his luxurious office. His words, as sharp as the marching wind in Chicago, still echoed in her mind. "You're too ordinary, Aisha. Did you think I'd choose you to build a family with?" Along with that came the $100,000 check he threw at her, as a way to erase both her and their unborn child from his life. Aisha hadn't taken the check, but the memory of being escorted out of Bennett Enterprises by security guards like a criminal still made her shudder every time she thought of it. She gently stroked her belly, where a tiny life was growing. Pregnancy had never been part of Aisha's plan. A 24-year-old literature teacher who had just moved to Chicago to start anew. But when the test showed 2 lines, she had believed that she and James, the man who had taken her to fine dining restaurants and whispered sweet nothings by Lake Michigan, would face this challenge together. Instead, she had been met with humiliation. Now, she lived in a rundown apartment in South Chicago, with peeling walls and neighbors' arguments echoing through the night. Her teaching job at Westview High, where she once hoped to build a career, was now in jeopardy due to pressure from the school board, many of whom were friends of James. Aisha knew he didn't just want her out of his life. He wanted her out of this city. Aisha Thompson? A nurse called her name, snapping her out of her thoughts. She stood, adjusted her worn green dress, and followed the nurse into a small exam room bathed in pale fluorescent light. The nurse, an older woman with a kind smile, gestured toward the ultrasound table. "All right, let's take a look at your baby. First-time mom, right?" Aisha nodded, her voice soft. "Yes, first time." She lay down, the cold ultrasound gel on her skin making her heart race faster. She tried to focus on the blurry screen before her, but her mind drifted to that alleyway behind Bennett Tower, tears falling as she promised herself that James wouldn't define her or her child's future. She had done everything she could to keep going, applying for part-time jobs, saving every penny for rent, and trying to stay healthy despite the nausea that nearly knocked her out. The nurse moved the probe across her belly, eyes fixed on the screen. Suddenly, she paused, her brows slightly furrowing. "Hold on, I need the doctor to take a look," she said, voice professional but laced with surprise. Aisha felt her heart clench. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice shaking. The nurse smiled to reassure her. "Not necessarily. Just relax. I'll be right back." But the urgency in the nurse's footsteps made Aisha uneasy. She stared at the ceiling, taking deep breaths. Worst-case scenarios swirled in her mind. Was something wrong with the baby? Was her body not strong enough for this pregnancy? She couldn't handle another shock. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, entered with the nurse. "Hello, Ms. Thompson. I'm Dr. Rivera." She introduced herself and took the ultrasound probe. She moved it slowly, carefully, her eyes locked on the screen. After a few tense minutes, she turned the monitor toward Aisha. "Congratulations," she said, a clear smile spreading across her face. "You're pregnant with identical triplets." Aisha blinked, her brain stalling. "Try triplets?" she repeated, barely a whisper. 3 tiny images appeared on the screen, each with a steadily beating heart. 3 babies. Not 1, but 3. A tidal wave of emotion surged through her, joy mixed with panic. How could she raise 1 child, let alone 3, when she wasn't even sure she could afford next month's rent? "You're 12 weeks along," Dr. Rivera continued calmly. "Identical triplets are very rare, about 1 in 200,000 pregnancies. We'll need to monitor closely, as triplet pregnancies carry higher risks." She explained nutritional needs, follow-up schedules, and the likelihood of premature birth. But Aisha only absorbed fragments. Her mind spun with questions. How could she raise 3 children alone? How could she give them a good life when she was barely surviving herself? When the appointment ended, Aisha stepped out into the glaring midday sun, squinting. She sat on a park bench nearby, holding her belly, trying to organize her thoughts. 3 babies, 3 lives grew inside her. She thought of James, who had flat out denied the first child. What would he say if he knew about 3? She took out her phone, scrolling to James's number, the one he once told her to call any time. She took a deep breath and pressed the call, and as expected, it went straight to voicemail. "James, it's Aisha," she said, her voice trembling, but resolute. "I'm pregnant with identical triplets. I'm not asking you for anything, but you should know." She hung up, knowing he would never respond. But leaving the message gave her a strange sense of closure. as she had just shut a door to the past. That night, in her dimly lit apartment, Aisha sat at the kitchen table, an old notebook before her. She began writing plans for the children. The first line was a promise. "You will never know your father rejected you." She listed what needed to be done. Find a stable job, save for medical expenses, and, most importantly, never let James's judgment, that she was too ordinary, define her future. She thought of her childhood in a poor Detroit neighborhood, where her mother, a single nurse, had raised her with love and sacrifice. "Mom did it," Aisha whispered. "So will I." But reality wasn't kind. In the days that followed, Aisha faced rejection after rejection. Initially impressed by her qualifications, employers hesitated when they learned she was pregnant. "We need someone who can work long-term without interruption," a restaurant manager said, glancing at her belly. Aisha smiled politely, but inside, the injustice felt like a knife. She wore loose clothes to hide her bump, hoping to delay detection. One evening, after another failed interview, Aisha sat on her bed, face in her hands, crying. She thought of James, living in a luxury penthouse, unbothered by her or their children. How could he walk away so easily? She wondered. But then, a gentle flutter in her belly stopped her. One of the babies had just kicked. She placed her hand over her stomach. Another kick, then another. 3 little souls, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. "All right, my babies," she whispered, wiping her tears. "Mom's not giving up." Aisha stood up, opened her old laptop, which whirred loudly after prolonged use, and began searching for support programs for single mothers. She enrolled in a free online coding course, remembering her small passion for programming back in college. An idea sparked, an adaptive learning platform based on her graduation project. She thought, "I'd give them a better future if I could pull this off." As dawn broke through the window, Aisha was still at the table, the notebook filled with notes and plans. 3 tiny hearts were beating inside her, and she knew that no matter how hard the road ahead, she would fight for them. James Bennett may have called her ordinary, but she would prove that a mother armed with love and determination could become something extraordinary. Aisha Thompson trudged down the darkened streets of South Chicago, her thin coat no match for the biting April wind of 2010. At 16 weeks pregnant, her belly had begun to show, making each step heavier. Just weeks ago, she had held on to a glimmer of hope that the news of carrying identical triplets might bring some light to the darkness left by James Bennett, the billionaire lover who had so bluntly rejected her and their children. But reality struck her like a blow. She had just received a termination letter from Westview High School, where she taught literature. The official reason was staff restructuring, but Aisha knew the truth. With his powerful connections in Chicago's elite circles, James had used his influence to ensure she had no place at the school run by one of his close friends. The small apartment she was renting had now become a burden. That morning, her landlord, a gruff man with a curt voice, had knocked on her door, demanding payment for 3 weeks of overdue rent. "Miss Thompson, I can't wait any longer," he said, his eyes flicking disapprovingly to her belly. "If you can't pay, you must be out by the end of the month." Aisha nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. But once the door closed, she slid to the floor and wept. She didn't cry because of the landlord's harshness, but because of the helplessness tightening around her heart. 3 babies, 3 tiny hearts she had seen beating on the ultrasound screen, depended on her, and she had no idea how to protect them. She stood up, wiped her tears, and opened her old laptop, the only valuable possession left in her rundown apartment. She searched for jobs, but every listing asked for experience or long-term availability, something no employer wanted from a pregnant woman carrying triplets. She had tried applying to restaurants, retail stores, and even a dental office, but the answers were always the same. "We'll be in touch." Their eyes, inevitably glancing at her belly, said everything. The prejudice against a single black mother with no financial support made her feel like she was fighting the entire world. Eventually, Aisha found a job at a 24-hour diner in a nearby neighborhood. The night shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., paid poorly, but at least no one questioned the growing bump beneath her loose apron. On her first night, she stood behind the counter, legs aching, serving truck drivers and late-night wanderers with a forced smile. Every time a customer left a tip, she slipped it into her pocket, calculating whether it would be enough to buy the nutritious food Dr. Rivera had recommended. "You need more calories, Aisha," the doctor had said at her last appointment. "These 3 babies need their mother to stay strong." But with a stretched budget, Aisha often survived on instant noodles or peanut butter sandwiches, saving better food for days she could afford vegetables. One night, while wiping the counter during a lull, Aisha felt a sharp pain in her belly. She stopped, cradling it, taking deep breaths. "Not now, babies. Not yet," she whispered, trying to calm herself. Her manager, a weathered woman named Marla, watched from across the room. "You all right, Thompson?" she asked, suspicion in her voice. Aisha nodded, forcing herself to stand upright. "I'm fine. I need a minute." But as Marla turned away, Aisha slumped into a chair, her heart racing. She knew she was pushing her body to its limit, but she had no other option. She and the babies would be on the street if she lost this job. When her shift ended, Aisha shuffled back to her apartment, the pale morning light casting long shadows on the worn-out buildings. She opened the door, greeted by the familiar smell of dampness. The notebook she'd started sat on the kitchen table when she found out she was carrying triplets. She flipped to the latest page, where she had written, "Find a way so the children never feel abandoned." But now, staring at the messy handwriting, a wave of doubt rose in her chest. "What have I done for them?" she whispered, voice cracking. She thought of her mother, who had raised her in a poor Detroit neighborhood, always saying, "Love is the greatest strength, Aisha." But was love enough to survive the coming months? She sat on the bed, her hand resting on her belly, feeling the soft movements of her children. A tiny kick, then another, like they were responding to her fear. Aisha smiled through tears, the loneliness lifting in that moment. "You're why I keep going," she whispered. She remembered her college thesis project, an adaptive education platform for students with different learning styles. It had once won awards, but had been forgotten when she moved to Chicago. Now, it sparked again like a beacon of hope. "If I can make it real," she thought, "I can give my kids a better future." Aisha opened the laptop, but the screen was flickering weakly. She searched for free online programming courses and enrolled in an introductory Python class. Though exhausted, she dedicated every morning after her night shift to studying, scribbling ideas into her notebook for the education platform she tentatively called LearnSphere. But then, one morning, as she typed, another wave of pain hit, stronger than before. She collapsed, clutching her belly, gasping for air. "No, please no," she muttered, crawling toward the phone to dial for help. At the hospital, Dr. Rivera examined her and reassured her that the babies were still safe, but her blood pressure was dangerously high. "You need to rest, Aisha," she said firmly. "You can't keep working night shifts. These 3 need you alive." Aisha nodded, but deep down, she knew. That rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. When she was discharged, she returned home only to find a notice taped to her door. "Vacate by April 30th. There are only 3 days left." That night, Aisha sat among her few packed boxes, holding her belly. She looked at an old photo of her and her mother, who had passed away when Aisha started college. "Mom, what do I do now?" she whispered. A cold wind blew through the cracked window as if carrying an answer. Aisha stood, took her notebook, and wrote, "Find a new place, anywhere. Keep the babies safe." She knew the area was dangerous, but she had no other choice. The next day, she found a cheaper apartment in a neighborhood notorious for crime. Peeling walls, no elevator, but it was what she could afford with her little savings. When she moved in, Aisha stood in the empty apartment, with only an old mattress on the floor. She looked out the window, where neon lights from a bar flickered. Somewhere, a police siren wailed. She held her belly, feeling 3 strong kicks, like a message. "We'll start over, babies," she said, her voice firm. "I won't let James Bennett or anyone else decide our fate." At that moment, Aisha felt a fire ignite inside her, not of anger, but of resolve. She would fight, not just for herself, but for the 3 tiny hearts beating within her. Aisha Thompson awoke in the darkness of her rundown apartment, a sharp pain slicing through her belly that jolted her upright, her breathing ragged. The wall clock read 4 a.m., October 15th, 2010. At the 33rd week of her pregnancy, she instantly knew these weren't Braxton Hicks contractions. Dr. Rivera had warned her about those. These pains were rhythmic, intense, and arrived with terrifying urgency. She clutched her belly, panic rising. "Not yet, babies," she whispered, trying to calm herself. "Mama needs more time." But her body refused to listen. The 3 babies inside her seemed ready to come. Aisha reached for the old phone on her bedside table with trembling hands. She dialed 911, her voice breaking. "I'm pregnant with triplets. I'm having contractions. I think they're coming early." The dispatcher urged her to stay calm and promised an ambulance was on the way. Aisha staggered to the door, unlocked it in advance, and sat on the floor, holding her belly, waiting. The next contraction hit, and she bit her lip to stop herself from screaming. She thought of James Bennett, the man who had rejected her and their children 6 months ago in his luxury office. "You're not here," she murmured, tears running down her cheeks. "But I won't let the babies be alone." The ambulance arrived with sirens blaring and red lights flashing through the window. 2 paramedics, a man and a woman, rushed in and lifted Aisha onto the stretcher. "Are you okay, Ms. Thompson?" the woman asked, checking her pulse. Aisha gave a weak nod, but the pain was too sharp to speak. On the way to the hospital, she clutched the paramedic's hand, her eyes lost and fearful. She thought of her mother, who had passed away while Aisha was in college, and wished more than anything that she was there now to hold her hand through this. At Cook County Hospital, everything became a whirlwind. Aisha was rushed straight into emergency care, where, by some stroke of luck, Dr. Rivera was on the night shift. "Aisha, you did the right thing coming in," she said, calm but firm. "We're going to take care of you and the babies." Nurses strapped fetal heart monitors to Aisha's belly. The sound of 3 heartbeats filled the room. Strong, but the smallest one was weaker. Dr. Rivera said baby C was in distress, eyes fixed on the screen. "We need to perform an emergency C-section." Aisha felt her chest tighten. "Will they be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Rivera held her hand. "They're fighters, just like their mother. But we have to move quickly." Aisha signed the consent form, her hand shaking so severely that the signature came out barely legible. As they wheeled her into the operating room, the blinding white lights made her squint. She felt more alone than ever. No family, James, just her and the 3 lives struggling to enter the world. The anesthesiologist administered the spinal block, explaining she would feel pressure, but no pain. Aisha nodded, trying to focus on a fixed point on the ceiling, whispering prayers. "Mama's here, babies," she murmured. "I'll always be here." Behind the blue curtain, Dr. Rivera began the procedure. Aisha felt a strange pressure, and then a weak cry pierced the sterile air. "Baby a boy," the doctor announced with relief. Aisha smiled through tears, her heart swelling. Seconds later, another cry, this one stronger. "Baby B is also a boy." Then, silence. Aisha held her breath, waiting for the third cry. Seconds stretched into an eternity. "Come on, baby C," she whispered, her hand gripping the bedsheet. At last, a faint, barely audible cry sounded. Baby C, the smallest but very brave. Dr. Rivera said, voice filled with hope. Aisha exhaled, tears streaming down her temples. Her 3 children had been born, but were immediately taken to the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, where incubators would help them fight through their fragile first days. After the surgery, Aisha lay in recovery, her body aching, but her mind fixed on her children. A nurse wheeled her to the NICU, where 3 tiny incubators stood side by side. She gazed through the glass, her heart tightening at seeing their red, delicate bodies covered in wires and tubes. Michael, the firstborn, is 4 pounds and 3 ounces, the nurse said, pointing to the baby with his tiny arms stretched outward. This is Daniel, exactly 4 pounds. He looks deep in thought. And finally, this is Caleb, 3 pounds 5 ounces, the smallest, but very strong. Aisha reached through a small opening in the incubator, touching Caleb's tiny finger. He gripped hers, a faint but determined grasp. "Mama loves you," she whispered, voice choked with emotion. The nurse asked gently, "Is any family coming to visit Ms. Thompson?" Aisha shook her head, her eyes never leaving her babies. "It's just us." She thought of James, who had denied the children from the start, and a wave of anger mixed with resolve washed over her. "They don't need him," she told herself. "I'll be everything they need." The following days were a blur of anxiety and hope. Aisha was discharged, but remained at the hospital daily, sitting beside her baby's incubators and reading them poetry, Maya Angelou, verses she once taught in class. Michael and Daniel progressed quickly, but Caleb, the tiniest, required a breathing machine longer. One night, when doctors warned he was showing signs of infection, Aisha felt her world collapse. She stood beside the incubator, holding his little hand, praying. "Fight, my love," she whispered, voice trembling. "Mama needs you." Caleb pulled through, like a minor miracle. After 3 weeks, Michael and Daniel were discharged and brought home to Aisha's apartment, but Caleb had to remain in the NICU for another month. Aisha split her time between caring for 2 babies at home and visiting the third, her body exhausted, but her heart full of hope. She pinned an ultrasound photo of the triplets on her apartment wall, a daily reminder of why she fought. On long nights, while the babies slept, Aisha opened her laptop and resumed her coding classes, jotting down ideas for LearnSphere, the educational platform she believed could shape a better future for her children. When Caleb was finally discharged, Aisha cradled his tiny body in her arms, tears falling onto his soft cheek. "We're going home, baby," she whispered, stepping out of the hospital with her 3 children, 3 little warriors born in the storm. She looked up at the Chicago sky, gray, but with a glimmer of sunlight breaking through. "We're going to make it," she said softly. And in that moment, Aisha knew. No matter how steep the road ahead, she and her children would walk it, together, one step at a time. Aisha Thompson woke at 3 a.m., the dim glow of a desk lamp casting soft light across her small apartment in South Chicago. The cries of Caleb, the youngest of her 3-year-old triplet sons, echoed from the old crib pressed against the wall. Aisha, now the mother of Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, quietly rose from the bed, her legs aching from another long day. It had been 3 years since the emergency C-section that brought her sons into the world. 3 years since Caleb nearly didn't survive. The NICU days now felt like a distant memory, but the trials of single motherhood still clung to her like the chill of Chicago's 2013 winter. She lifted Caleb into her arms, gently patting his back as she hummed a lullaby her mother used to sing. The small apartment, with its peeling walls and creaky wooden floors, was all she could afford with the income from her remote job as a content editor for an educational website. The work paid little, allowing her to stay home with the boys. That also meant sleepless nights balancing deadlines with the relentless energy of 3 toddlers. Once Caleb was asleep, she returned him to the crib and glanced at Michael and Daniel sleeping peacefully in the twin bed beside it. Michael, the eldest, slept with arms outstretched as if embracing the world. Daniel, the little math enthusiast, was curled up with an arithmetic workbook beneath his pillow. Aisha sat at the kitchen table, where her old laptop buzzed loudly as it booted up. She opened a document titled LearnSphere, Phase 1, filled with notes and concepts for the adaptive learning platform she had envisioned since pregnancy. Based on her college thesis, LearnSphere was designed to identify and adjust to each student's learning style. Aisha believed that if she could build it, it wouldn't just transform her children's future, but help thousands of others. Yet, with limited resources, time, money, and energy, the dream remained fragmented lines of code and sketches on paper. That morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the torn window curtains, Michael was the first to wake, his curly hair in a wild mess. "Mom, I want to make a robot," he announced, holding a plastic toy. Aisha smiled, her eyes stinging from lack of sleep. "What will your robot do?" she asked, pouring milk into 3 plastic cups. "It'll teach me how to read faster," Michael answered, eyes gleaming. Even at 3, he showed signs of analytical thinking and constant curiosity about how things worked. Daniel appeared next, counting every step from the bed to the kitchen. 1, 2, 3, 17 steps, he proclaimed proudly as he sat down. Aisha placed toast on his plate and praised, "You're getting good at counting." Obsessed with numbers, Daniel turned everything into a math puzzle, from spoonfuls of cereal to the number of buses passing the window. Last came Caleb, quietly walking in with a sheet of paper filled with circles and intricate lines. "For you, Mama," he said, handing over his drawing. Aisha looked at the symmetrical shapes, amazed by the creativity of her quietest son, who rarely spoke, but communicated deeply through art. Breakfast was a joyful mess: spilled milk, scattered cereal, and endless questions. "Why does the sun rise?" Michael asked. "How many stars are there?" Daniel chimed in. Caleb pointed at his drawing, silently asking if she liked it. Aisha answered each question, even as her mind raced, juggling the boys, deadlines, and the looming electricity bill. She looked at them, her heart overflowing with love, but also heavy with worry. How could she give them a good life when every day was a fight for survival? That afternoon, she took them to the nearby park, where the rusty swings were their greatest joy. She sat on a bench, watching Michael lead a space exploration game. Daniel counted swing motions while Caleb drew a spaceship in the dirt. Aisha opened her laptop to squeeze in some work, but an email made her freeze. "Due to budget cuts, your hours will be reduced starting next month." She closed the screen, feeling the ground crumble beneath her. Her already modest income was now threatened, while the cost of raising 3 children kept rising. After the boys were asleep that night, Aisha sat at the kitchen table staring at a pile of unpaid bills. She thought of James Bennett, likely in a luxury penthouse, unconcerned with her or their sons. Anger surged, but she suppressed it. Being angry won't change anything, she told herself. Instead, she opened the LearnSphere file and began coding a learning style detection algorithm. But before long, Michael woke crying from a nightmare. Aisha held him, soothed him to sleep, then returned to her laptop. The cursor blinked. "I can't do it all," she whispered, feeling for the first time the weight of failure. The next morning, Aisha received a call from her elderly neighbor, Ms. Ruth, who occasionally brought her food. "Aisha, I see you working too hard," Ruth said, concerned. "Let me watch the boys a few hours a day. You need time for yourself." Aisha hesitated, unaccustomed to help, but Ms. Ruth's genuine tone persuaded her. After a few hours of freedom, Aisha walked to the public library, where free Wi-Fi allowed her to work on LearnSphere. She fixed a bug in the code, feeling like she was reclaiming part of herself, the Aisha from college, full of ambition and spark. While Aisha was testing LearnSphere's interface one afternoon, Michael sat beside her, pointing at the screen. "This button's hard to press, Mama," he said, his tiny finger poking the corner. Aisha blinked. He was right. He had spotted something she hadn't. "You're right," she smiled. "Want to help Mama build this?" Michael nodded excitedly, and soon all three boys became part of her inspiration. Daniel suggested more math games for the program. Caleb drew simple but striking icons for the interface. Aisha realized her sons, despite their young age, already had unique talents, and LearnSphere wasn't just her dream anymore. It was their future. As 2013 ended, Aisha looked at her boys sleeping soundly, feeling hope flicker amid hardship. She hung a new calendar on the wall, marking the first day in 2014. "We'll make it through," she whispered, placing her hand on the ultrasound photo pinned beside it. In that small apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and unfinished dreams, Aisha knew her journey with her sons had only begun. Aisha Thompson stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting the navy dress she had bought from a thrift store, trying to hide the rising anxiety in her chest. Today, May 15th, 2014, was the day she would present LearnSphere, the adaptive educational platform she had spent 3 years building through sleepless nights, at the Chicago Tech Innovators Competition. With a $150,000 prize and a chance to join a startup incubator, it was her opportunity to change her life and that of her 3.5-year-old triplet sons, Michael, Daniel, and Caleb. But her phone rang just as she was about to leave the house. It was Ms. Ruth, the elderly neighbor who often babysat. "Aisha, I'm so sorry," Ms. Ruth's weak voice said. "I've got a high fever. The doctor says it's pneumonia. I can't watch the kids today." Aisha felt her heart drop. "Please rest. Don't worry," she replied, trying to sound calm. But as she hung up, she sank into the kitchen chair, her mind spinning. She had planned everything: her pitch, the slideshow, even potential answers to tough questions from the judges. But she hadn't planned for last-minute childcare failure. Her mind raced through alternatives. Other neighbors were too busy, babysitting services were expensive, and the local community center required 48 hours notice. She looked at her boys playing on the floor. Michael was stacking colored blocks, Daniel was counting each, and Caleb was sketching a picture complete of circles. How could she miss this opportunity? But how could she bring 3 toddlers to a professional tech event? "Mama, are you sad?" Caleb asked, his sensitive eyes catching the tension in her face. Aisha hugged him and took a deep breath. "I have an important meeting, but Miss Ruth is sick, so I'm figuring things out." With the confidence of the oldest, Michael declared, "We'll go with you." Aisha looked at her 3 boys, considering the wild idea. Bringing 3 3-year-olds to a tech competition? Disaster in the making. But Daniel nodded and said, "I'll count quietly." And Caleb whispered, "I'll draw without making noise." A spark of hope flickered in her chest. "All right," she said, voice firm. "But you have to be super well behaved. Like secret agents, okay?" She quickly prepared 3 little backpacks filled with coloring books, quiet toys, and their favorite crackers. She wrote her phone number on 3 cards and slipped them into each boy's pocket. "If you ever get lost, give this to a grown-up." She said they'd find me, and her heart tightened at the thought. The taxi dropped them off at the Chicago Innovation Center, a gleaming glass building filled with people in expensive business attire. Aisha held her son's hands, sensing the receptionist's curious glance as she registered. She explained the childcare emergency briefly, forcing a smile as she accepted her ID badge. Inside the main hall, Aisha chose a seat near the exit and positioned her kids like a tiny squad. Michael in the middle, Daniel and Caleb on each side. "Agent mission. Be quiet and good," she whispered, handing each a coloring book. She glanced around and saw the competition, mostly young men in sleek techwear or women in sharp professional dresses, prepping elaborate presentations with support teams behind them. Suddenly, she felt out of place, a single black mother with 3 children, while everyone else seemed armed with resources and polish. But then she thought of those late nights coding, Michael pointing out interface bugs, Daniel suggesting math problems, and Caleb sketching app icons. "I belong here," she told herself. The early presentations were smooth, flashy slides and confident voices, Aisha observed, nervous, but learning. Surprisingly, her boys stayed calm. Michael flipped pages, Daniel counted fingers, and Caleb drew a spaceship. Then her name was called. Number 5, Aisha Thompson, LearnSphere. Her heart pounded as she connected her laptop to the projector, her hands slightly trembling. She looked into the crowd and saw her 3 sons looking up at her, eyes full of trust. In that instant, a bold idea struck her. Instead of hiding her children as a liability, why not center them as her story's strength? "I'm Aisha Thompson, founder of LearnSphere," she began, and her voice was steadier than expected. "Today, I'd like to invite 3 very special collaborators to join me." The room murmured as Michael, Daniel, and Caleb stepped onto the stage holding hands, serious and adorably determined. This is Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, identical triplets, yet each learns differently. That's the challenge our education system faces. She launched LearnSphere on the screen and handed each boy a tablet. Watch how LearnSphere adapts to each learning style. The audience, initially curious, became captivated as Michael navigated logical options. Daniel solved math problems in a flash, and Caleb explored visual prompts. Aisha explained, LearnSphere uses game-like assessments to identify learning styles, then automatically adapts content to match. Early testing shows a 30% increase in engagement and comprehension. One judge, Robert Carter, CEO of Carter Communications and father of James Bennett's fiancée, removed his glasses, his sharp eyes intrigued. When a judge asked about deployment costs, Daniel suddenly piped up, "It only takes 7 seconds to load, faster than other programs." The audience erupted in laughter, and Robert Carter smiled, clearly charmed. Aisha wrapped up on time, returning to her seat with the boys. Her heart thudded with hope. The final pitch felt endless, and the boys began to fidget. But Aisha kept them calm by whispering a bedtime story about space agents on a mission. At last, the judges announced, "First prize goes to LearnSphere by Aisha Thompson." Applause thundered through the hall. Aisha stood frozen until Michael tugged her sleeve. "Mama, we won!" She walked to the stage, her sons trailing behind her like little ducklings. Robert Carter handed her the prize and shook her hand. "Outstanding presentation," he said. "I want to invite you to Carter Communications Startup Incubator. LearnSphere has enormous potential." Aisha nodded, heart pounding as she realized who he was, but kept her smile professional. "Thank you. I'm honored." As they left the stage, Aisha hugged her boys, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You were the best secret agents ever," she whispered. In that moment, she knew this victory wasn't just about prize money or business. It was proof that she and her sons could overcome every judgment, even James Bennett's cruel words. Aisha Thompson stood before the glass door of her new Carter Communications Startup Incubator office, clutching her access badge like a lucky charm. A small sign beside the door read, "Aisha Thompson, LearnSphere," and it made her smile, but also sent her heart racing with pressure. It was July 2014, just 2 months after her victory at the Chicago Tech Innovators Competition, and her life had changed drastically. The $150,000 prize had allowed her to upgrade her laptop, hire a developer, and move her triplet sons, Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, into a safer, larger apartment. But as she stood before this office, she knew the real journey was only beginning. She stepped inside, light from the large window streaming across a sleek workstation with dual monitors, a far cry from the buzzing laptop in her old apartment. In one corner was a small meeting table, where she hoped to speak with investors. LearnSphere, the adaptive learning platform she had built through endless nights, was now poised to become a reality. But the weight of Robert Carter's expectations, CEO of Carter Communications and father of James Bennett's fiancée, pressed heavily on her. She hadn't seen James since he had rejected her and her unborn children. But the name Bennett still haunted her like a shadow. That morning, Aisha interviewed her first team member for LearnSphere, Sarah Lee, a young programmer fresh out of college with a minor in early childhood education, entered with a bright smile. "I read about LearnSphere after the competition," Sarah said, eyes shining. "Your idea is truly inspiring. I want to work on something meaningful, not just optimize ads for big corporations." Aisha smiled, sensing a kindred spirit. She said honestly that "I can't pay like Google, but I promise this work will change how children learn." Sarah nodded without hesitation. "I'm in." With Sarah on board, LearnSphere began to evolve. The two worked tirelessly, refining the learning style detection algorithm and improving the user interface. Her sons, now 4 years old, often joined her at the office after preschool, filling the space with boundless energy. Michael, ever analytical, liked sitting next to Sarah, pointing out minor bugs in the UI. He once said this button isn't logical, pointing at a navigation icon. Sarah laughed, but Aisha noticed that Michael was right. Daniel, passionate about math, proposed new challenges for the program, while Caleb, her quiet artist, designed intuitive icons that made the interface friendlier. Aisha began incorporating their ideas, realizing her children weren't just her inspiration, they were her ideal users. One afternoon, as Aisha was reviewing pilot data, her phone rang. Robert Carter was inviting her to his office to discuss LearnSphere's progress. She stepped into his sleek meeting room, heart pounding as he sat across the desk, his eyes sharp yet warm. "LearnSphere has enormous potential, Aisha," he said. "I want to introduce you to some investors next month. Are you ready?" Aisha nodded, though nerves swirled beneath her calm. "Thank you. I'm preparing everything I can." Robert smiled, then added, "By the way, my daughter Emily is getting engaged. You should attend her engagement party. It's a great networking opportunity." Aisha felt the blood drain from her face. Emily Carter, James Bennett's fiancée. She pictured the confrontation. James, in a room full of Chicago's elite, his eyes scanning over her like a stranger. The same man who once called her ordinary. "Thank you for the invitation," she replied steadily. "However, I need to focus on LearnSphere's development milestones." Robert nodded, not pressing, but his eyes studied her thoughtfully. Aisha left the office, her heart heavy. She knew it was only a matter of time before her path and James's would collide again. The next day, as Aisha brought her children to the office, she glanced through the hallway window. Dressed in an expensive suit, James Bennett stepped out of the elevator holding hands with Emily Carter. Aisha's heart thudded. She quickly pulled the curtain, hiding her sons playing on the floor. "Mama, why are you closing the curtain?" Michael asked curiously. She replied to keep the sunlight off the screen, her voice shaky. She stood still, listening to the echo of James's deep voice and fading footsteps. When the elevator doors closed, she exhaled deeply, her hand still gripping the curtain. That moment reminded her, no matter how far she'd come, the pain of James's betrayal still lingered. After the boys were asleep that night, Aisha looked out the window in her new apartment. City lights twinkled, but her mind drifted back to the day she was escorted out of Bennett Enterprises, pregnant and humiliated. She opened her laptop and revisited LearnSphere's data, a renewed fire rising in her chest. "He won't block my path anymore," she whispered. She wrote an email to Sarah, proposing a new feature, accessibility tools for children with disabilities, an idea sparked by one of Caleb's colorful icon drawings. By the end of the month, Aisha presented to a small group of investors arranged by Robert Carter. She stood before them, scanning the room full of men in tailored suits, feeling as out of place as she had at the tech competition. But her confidence rose as she began to speak about LearnSphere, how it helped children learn in their way, from underserved neighborhoods to elite schools. "Education is the great equalizer," she concluded, "and LearnSphere ensures no child is left behind." The investors nodded thoughtfully. One asked, "How do you plan to scale with limited resources?" Before Aisha could reply, Robert interjected, "That's precisely why she's here. Aisha is targeting high-need schools, low competition, but high impact." The meeting ended with a promise of modest funding, enough to hire a UI designer. Back at the office, Aisha found Caleb drawing a new icon, a star with multicolored rays. "For LearnSphere," he said softly. Aisha hugged him, pride and determination swelling in her heart. She looked at Michael and Daniel arguing over a math problem and realized that her sons weren't just her motivation. They were her partners in this dream. And even if James Bennett reappeared at any moment, Aisha was ready. LearnSphere would be the proof that she and her children were never ordinary. Aisha Thompson stood on the porch of her new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago, as the golden October sunset lit the treetops. The laughter of Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, now 10 years old, echoed from the backyard, where the triplets were debating how to assemble a model spaceship. 5 years had passed since her victory at the Chicago Tech Innovators Competition, and Aisha's life had transformed dramatically. LearnSphere, her adaptive learning platform, had grown into a multi-million-dollar enterprise serving underserved schools nationwide, and she had just signed her first international implementation contract in Asia. This home, purchased with the success of LearnSphere, stood as a testament to her journey from the darkness of a rundown apartment to a stable future for her children. She stepped inside, setting her bag on the kitchen table. Though not luxurious, the house was a haven compared to the crumbling walls and creaking floors of their past. She smiled at the faded ultrasound photo of her 3 boys on the wall, still the symbol of the greatest motivation in her life. LearnSphere now occupies an entire floor in the Carter Communications building, with a team of 35 employees and the support of Robert Carter, a sponsor and a dedicated advisor. Yet the name Carter always reminded Aisha of James Bennett, Emily Carter's former fiancé, and the man who had rejected her and their unborn children nearly a decade ago. Her sons now attended Lakeside Academy, a prestigious private school, thanks to merit scholarships. Michael, with his sharp analytical mind, often led group projects. Daniel, passionate about math, had won first place in a regional math competition. Caleb, the sensitive artist, had designed user interfaces that stunned his school's tech instructor, but Aisha kept them grounded, ensuring they were not just prodigies, but regular boys who liked playing soccer and eating mom's homemade cake. One afternoon, Aisha visited Lakeside for the annual science fair. The gymnasium buzzed with students and parents crowding around colorful booths. Michael's project stood out immediately, a redesigned version of LearnSphere tailored for students with dyslexia. Wearing a crisp shirt, he explained to the judges, "This algorithm identifies how students process text and reduces reading time by up to 25%. Aisha stood in the back, pride swelling in her chest. Nearby, Daniel showcased a mathematical model predicting learning outcomes, while Caleb displayed a visual interface that helped visually impaired students navigate software more easily. When the judges arrived, one middle-aged man introduced himself, Dr. Paul Warren from Bennett Tech. Aisha froze at the name. "He said this boy has a rare talent," shaking Michael's hand. "We have a weekend program for gifted students. Would you like to join?" Michael's eyes lit up. "Mom, Bennett Tech is the biggest company in Chicago. Can I go?" Aisha forced a smile, her heart pounding. "We'll talk about it later, sweetheart," she said, accepting Dr. Warren's business card. She knew James Bennett, CEO of Bennett Tech, likely had no idea Michael was his son, but the thought of her children becoming involved with his company unsettled her deeply. After the boys had gone to sleep that night, Aisha sat at the kitchen table, staring at the business card. She remembered the day James had called her ordinary and asked her to take care of the pregnancy. She had built a life without him, but now he was unknowingly reaching toward the children he once refused. She opened her laptop and searched for news about James. Bennett Tech was still a tech giant, but recent articles hinted at internal struggles and failed product launches. One image showed James looking tense. He had reportedly divorced once already. Aisha closed the browser, feeling a mix of anger and relief. "He doesn't deserve them," she whispered. The next day, Aisha received an email from EdTech Innovator magazine inviting LearnSphere to be featured on the cover with a full interview. She agreed to provide technical content, but declined a personal photo to preserve her children's privacy from James's attention. She wrote back, emphasizing that LearnSphere was about technology, not her personal story. Yet deep down, she knew she was protecting her sons from the father who once rejected them. One evening, Aisha threw a small backyard party to celebrate the boys' 10th birthday. She baked her traditional chocolate cake, a ritual from their hardest days, and gave each boy a small gift: a science book for Michael, a set of advanced math puzzles for Daniel, and premium drawing paper for Caleb. As they ate cake, the boys shared their dreams. "I want to make software that helps kids with disabilities," said Michael. "I'm going to win a national math award," Daniel declared. "I want to design something beautiful for everyone," Caleb whispered. Aisha pulled them into a hug, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You boys are the greatest gift I've ever received," she said. Later that night, after the house fell quiet, Aisha stepped into the backyard and looked up at the starry sky. She thought about her journey, from a rejected single mother to a leading voice in educational technology. She knew James Bennett might appear at any moment, but she no longer feared him. LearnSphere and her sons proved that she had defied every label he placed on her. She whispered to herself, "We didn't just survive. We're shining." Aisha Thompson sat in her spacious office on the 15th floor of the Carter Communications Building, the December 2024 morning light streaming through the tall windows, glinting off the polished ebony desk. At 38, she had transformed LearnSphere from a rough sketch born in a rundown apartment into a billion-dollar educational technology company serving schools across 15 countries. And on the wall still hung the ultrasound image of her triplet sons, Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, now 14 years old, a silent reminder of the journey that began when James Bennett, her billionaire lover, rejected them all 15 years ago. But today, as she prepared for her keynote speech at the National EdTech Conference, a name sent her pulse racing. James Bennett was replacing a last-minute canceled speaker. She opened her laptop and searched for the latest news on James. The headlines were relentless. Bennett Tech loses 40% market value after privacy scandal. CEO James Bennett is under fire from shareholders' facial recognition software by Bennett Tech used in surveillance of minority communities. Human rights violations alleged. A recent press photo showed James at a press conference, his once smug confidence replaced by gray-streaked hair and a deeply lined, tense expression. The scandal stemmed from his company's facial recognition tool being used illegally by security agencies to monitor minority populations, sparking protests and multiple lawsuits. James, now twice divorced, including from Emily Carter, daughter of Robert Carter, had become a cautionary tale in the tech world. Aisha closed the browser, her emotions colliding in silence. She no longer hated James, but the memory of him calling her ordinary and demanding she deal with the pregnancy remained like a scar beneath her success. She had built LearnSphere to prove him wrong, and now, as she prepared to announce an $850 million acquisition of FutureLearn at the conference, fate was placing them face-to-face again. Her gaze landed on the photo of her sons on her desk, pride and unease mingling. Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, now brilliant teenagers, would attend the event with her. Would James recognize them, these boys who carried his younger face? That afternoon, Aisha met with her team to finalize her presentation. Sarah Lee, now Chief Technology Officer at LearnSphere, shared new analytics. Our system increased academic performance by 28% in Asian schools. Michael joined via video from Lakeside Academy. He reported that I optimized the language access algorithm and cut loading time by 12%. Aisha smiled, glowing with maternal pride. Daniel had emailed financial forecasts predicting LearnSphere's stock would rise 8% after the merger. Creative and sensitive, Caleb submitted a redesigned interface for visually impaired students, leaving the team in awe. Aisha knew her sons weren't just gifted. They were the soul of LearnSphere. As the meeting ended, Aisha received a confirmation email from the conference organizers. James Bennett would present a talk titled Rebuilding After Technological Failure, a Cruel Irony. She stood, looking out at the Chicago skyline, where she had once sobbed in an alley after James cast her out of the Bennett Enterprises tower. "He's no longer a threat," she whispered. But the thought of her children encountering their biological father stirred anxiety. She had always shielded them, telling them only that their father wasn't ready to be a dad. But now, at 14, her boys were far too intelligent not to suspect the truth if James appeared. That evening, Aisha returned to her suburban home. The boys were working at the kitchen table, Michael arguing with Daniel over a math problem, Caleb sketching in solitude for his school art project. "Mom, I found a bug in FutureLearn's language module," Michael said when he saw her. Aisha hugged him, pride laced with worry. "Have you seen the conference schedule yet?" she asked, voice carefully. Daniel nodded. You're the keynote speaker. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Caleb, always the sensitive one, looked up. Are you worried, Mom? Aisha sat down, choosing her words. There's been a change. James Bennett from Bennett Tech will speak in the afternoon. The boys exchanged glances. They'd heard the name from the news. Is the guy being sued for privacy issues? Michael asked. That's him, Aisha replied, watching their reactions. Daniel, ever logical, said, his company's a case study in bad risk management. Caleb added softly. I read their software hurt many people. Why'd they invite him? Aisha smiled faintly. The conference wants diverse perspectives. She paused, searching for suspicion in their eyes. But they just nodded and returned to their work. After the boys went to bed, Aisha stood outside under the starry sky. She remembered being pregnant and standing alone as James asked her to disappear. Now, she stood at the peak of her career, while James struggled to salvage his. But she didn't want revenge. She only wanted to protect her sons from the pain James once caused. She opened her journal and wrote, Tomorrow, I face the past, not for James, but for my sons and LearnSphere. We've come too far to turn back now. The next morning, Aisha put on a sapphire blue suit and diamond earrings, a gift she gave herself when LearnSphere reached $1 billion valuation. She looked in the mirror and no longer saw the trembling girl from years ago, but a confident executive. Behind her stood Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, sharply dressed. Mom, you look like a superhero, Caleb said, making her laugh. And you boys are my team, she replied, leading them to the company's limousine. As the car glided through Chicago, Aisha mentally rehearsed her speech, ready to unveil the future Learn deal, a move that would take LearnSphere global. But deep down, she knew this conference was about more than business. It was her moment to face James Bennett, not as a victim, but as the victor. Aisha Thompson stood in a small waiting room adjacent to the main stage of the Chicago Innovation Center, heart pounding yet hands steady as she adjusted the microphone on her sapphire blue blazer. It was December 16th, 2024, and the auditorium beyond was packed with over 500 investors, tech leaders, and journalists, all awaiting her keynote address as the CEO of LearnSphere, a $5 billion education company. But what tightened her chest wasn't just the imminent announcement of an $850 million acquisition of FutureLearn. It was the fact that James Bennett, the man who had once rejected her and their triplet sons, Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, would take the stage immediately after. She took a deep breath and looked in the mirror. The face staring back wasn't the trembling girl escorted out of Bennett Enterprises Tower in 2010. This was a woman carved from resilience. She lightly touched the diamond earrings, her gift to herself when LearnSphere reached unicorn status, and stepped into the hallway. Her sons, now 14 and dressed in tailored suits, were waiting. Mom, social media is blowing up over your speech, Michael said, eyes locked on his laptop. LearnSphere stock is already up 4% since this morning. Daniel, crunching numbers on a tablet, added, projections say it'll rise another 8% after the deal. Caleb, the most perceptive, looked at her. You okay, Mom? You look tense. Aisha smiled, embracing him briefly. I'm okay. It's just a big day. She led them into the auditorium and found front row seats for them. As she stepped onto the stage, hushed murmurs filled the room. A spotlight bathed her in white light. She scanned the crowd, and then she saw him. James Bennett entered from the rear, wearing a sharp gray suit, accompanied by a much younger woman, rumored to be his third wife. He looked older now, gray at the temples, though he carried himself with the same entitled poise. He settled into his seat, eyes glued to his phone, unaware of her presence. Aisha took a breath and began. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Aisha Thompson, CEO of LearnSphere, she said, voice ringing clear. 15 years ago, I dreamed of an educational platform that could recognize and adapt to each student's learning style. Today, that dream is a global reality. She walked the audience through LearnSphere's journey, from its humble beginnings to leading the edtech world, sharing data on how the platform had increased learning outcomes by 30% in underserved schools. She noticed James look up from the corner of her eye, his expression shifting as he finally recognized her. His wife followed his gaze, curiosity replacing indifference. Then came the announcement. I'm proud that LearnSphere has acquired FutureLearn for $850 million. Will integrate their advanced language technology and expand to 47 countries in the next 18 months. The room erupted into applause. Cameras flashed. James now sat upright, eyes fixed on her, and then on the three boys in the front row, taking notes. His face paled as he began registering their striking resemblance to his younger self. Aisha kept her voice steady, handling audience questions with sharp confidence. As she stepped off stage, her sons rushed to her, beaming. "Mom, Twitter's going wild!" Michael grinned. Daniel added that the stock was up 7%. "You were terrific," Caleb said, holding her hand. Before Aisha could reply, a stir near the stage door turned their heads. James stood there, eyes locked on them. His wife tugged at his arm, clearly uneasy. Aisha quickly guided her sons away. "Let's head to the press room," she said calmly. Aisha fielded questions professionally at the press conference, while her sons occasionally gave technical insights. One reporter asked Biz Thompson, the first female CEO to execute a deal of this magnitude in education tech, how it feels. She smiled. "It proves that our mission, equal education access for every child, resonates. This success belongs to our team, including these three young innovators." She gestured to her sons. Applause followed. That evening, at the gala at the Grand Chicago Hotel, Aisha arrived with her sons, instantly drawing attention. In matching tuxedos, the boys looked like younger versions of James, something she couldn't ignore. She sensed James watching from across the room, standing by the bar, his wife wearing a tense expression. "Mom, why does Mr. Bennett keep looking at us?" Caleb whispered, always sensitive to tension. "Maybe he's just impressed by your work," Aisha replied gently. Throughout the evening, Aisha mingled with investors, but she could feel James drawing closer. Eventually, as she stood alone near the dessert table, his voice came from behind. "Aisha." She turned. There he was, for the first time in 15 years. He looked tired, his eyes carrying a strange mix of awe and regret. You look incredible. Your company is incredible." Her tone was calm. "Thank you, James. I didn't expect to see you here." He glanced toward the boys, who were chatting with a CTO nearby. "Those boys, are they yours?" Aisha nodded, eyes steely. He said, "They looked like they liked me when I was that voice wavering." "Genetics are remarkable, aren't they?" Aisha replied, tone sharp. "They're mine, James, not yours." He opened his mouth to speak, but his wife appeared, forcing a strained smile. "James, you promised to introduce me to the Peterson Group." Later that night, Aisha was called on stage to accept the Educational Innovator of the Year award. As she took the microphone, she briefly let her eyes pass over James. 15 years ago, I was told I was too ordinary to succeed," she began, voice unwavering. "But true innovation comes from those who solve real problems, not from ivory towers." The hall erupted in applause. James lowered his head, visibly struck. Aisha stepped down from the stage, not with revenge in her heart, but with radiant triumph. Aisha Thompson led Michael, Daniel, and Caleb into the presidential suite at the Grand Chicago Hotel, the echo of her heels clicking against the marble floor. It was the night of December 16, 2024, following the gala at the National EdTech Conference. The air remained heavy with the weight of a brief but piercing encounter. James Bennett, the man who had once rejected her and her unborn triplet sons 15 years ago, had seen them. The stunned look in his eyes and Caleb's innocent question, "Mom, why did Mr. Bennett keep staring at us?" made Aisha realize she could no longer keep the truth from them. She slipped off her heels and sank into the soft leather sofa, motioning for her sons to gather around. Michael, the sharp analyst, took the armchair beside her. Daniel, the math lover, sat cross-legged on the rug. Caleb, the most sensitive, settled close, his eyes already clouded with concern. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the quiet tick of the wall clock. Aisha drew a breath, searching for the right words. "Boys," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I've kept to myself for a long time." Michael tilted his head, eyes sharp. "It's about James Bennett. The way he looked at us. It wasn't like a stranger." Daniel nodded, adding that statistically, the probability that he has a personal connection to us is 92%. Caleb whispered, "Mom, who is he to us?" Aisha reached for Caleb's hand, her throat tightening. She had prepared herself for this moment, but facing the clear, searching eyes of her children made it feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. "James Bennett is your biological father," she said, voice steady but heavy with emotion. The words hung in the air like a silent explosion. Michael sat up straight, processing the data. Daniel frowned, computing timelines. Caleb, eyes glistening, squeezed her hand. "He didn't want us, did he?" Aisha pulled him into her arms, tears finally falling. "I met him when I was 24, working as a teacher and tutoring his niece. We fell in love. But when I told him I was pregnant, he said, I didn't belong in his life. He handed me money to leave. When I refused, he had security escort me out." Michael stood up, pacing. "So he knew about us from the beginning?" Aisha nodded. "I left a message when I found out I was having triplets. He never responded." Daniel's tone was colder. "So he didn't forget. He chose to abandon us. He had 5,475 days to make it right, and did nothing." Caleb, his voice cracking, asked, "Then why did he look at us like he wanted something?" Aisha stroked his hair gently. "I think he was shocked to see how brilliant, confident, and capable you've become. But that doesn't mean he deserves to be called a father." Michael turned back, eyes fierce. "We want to meet him, Mom. Not to forgive, but to understand." Daniel agreed. "Data is incomplete if we only hear your side." Caleb hesitated, then said quietly, "I want to know why." Aisha looked at them, her heart swelling with pride and worry. "If that's what you want, I'll make it happen. But it has to be your decision." A knock interrupted them. Aisha glanced at the security monitor, and her heart clenched. James Bennett stood in the hallway, suit rumpled, face taut. "It's him," she whispered, turning to the boys. "Do you want to see him now?" The boys exchanged glances, a wordless bond Aisha had always admired. Michael nodded. "Now. On our terms." Aisha opened the door and stood between James and her sons like a sentinel. "Aisha," James said hoarsely, "I need to speak with you, with the boys." She folded her arms. "You don't get to decide that, James. They know who you are. It's their choice if they speak to you. James looked past her. His eyes met the three boys standing shoulder to shoulder, near-perfect mirrors of his younger self, but with the calm strength of Aisha. I don't know where to begin, he said, voice shaking. You're remarkable. Michael stepped forward, voice sharp. You knew about us 15 years ago, when Mom told you she was pregnant. James flinched. He nodded slowly. I was wrong. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Daniel's voice was ice. A mistake is a one-time event. You had 5,475 days to correct it. Why didn't you? James turned to Aisha, as if seeking help. She said nothing. This was their moment. Caleb, tears brimming, asked, Why now? Is it because we're talented, or because your company's collapsing? The question hit like a blade. James sank into a chair, covering his face. Bennett Tech is imploding. Privacy scandal. Investors fleeing. I saw Aisha, saw you boys tonight, and realized what I've missed. You are better versions of me. Michael crossed his arms. We're not assets to be appraised because your empire's falling. We're our mother's sons, not yours. Aisha felt a fire of pride rise behind her chest. James looked at her again. Aisha, I can give them access. Elite schools, networks. Daniel cut him off. We already have full scholarships to Lakeside. I'm a 3-time national math champion. Caleb designed accessibility software used in 28 countries. What exactly do you have to offer? Silence. James's face emptied of bravado. Aisha stepped forward, voice calm but firm. They don't need you, James. They never have. Caleb, quiet but steady, said, We'll meet with you again, once, to ask more questions, but not for you, for closure. James nodded slowly, stood, and walked out like a man who had already lost everything. The door closed behind him, and the room was quiet again. Aisha pulled her sons into a hug, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Michael's voice was steady. We don't need him. You're enough. Daniel added that he's a case study in failure. Caleb held her tightly. You're our family. Through her tears, Aisha smiled, knowing the truth, however painful, had brought them even closer. Aisha Thompson sat in her office at LearnSphere's global headquarters, the warm glow of the December 30th sunset spilling through the wide window, bathing her desk in soft amber light. At 38, she had built LearnSphere into a $5 billion educational technology empire, with offices in 15 countries and a recent $850 million acquisition of FutureLearn, announced at the National EdTech Conference. But as her eyes settled on the ultrasound photo of 3 unborn boys, Michael, Daniel, and Caleb, framed on the wall, she knew her true victory was never in numbers. It was in the family she had raised from the darkest days, back when James Bennett, her billionaire lover, called her ordinary and rejected both her and their unborn children. 2 weeks had passed since the conference, where Aisha faced James for the first time in 15 years. Her sons, now 14, had confronted him with clarity and calm. That night in the Grand Chicago Hotel presidential suite had left Aisha with mixed emotions: pride in her son's maturity, relief in telling the truth, and a quiet ache for what could have been. She opened her journal, a habit from her leanest days, and wrote, Today, I realized the best revenge is not diminishing those who hurt you, but living a life where their absence means nothing. That morning, her sons returned from their third meeting with James at a quiet lakeside restaurant. Aisha watched them walk into the office, still dressed in sharp suits from a LearnSphere development meeting. Michael, always the analyst, spoke first. The meeting was enlightening. Mr. Bennett wants to connect, but it feels like he's looking for a lifeline to salvage his reputation. Daniel, pragmatic as ever, added, "We analyzed his company's structure. Bennett Tech has a 73% chance of bankruptcy in 2 years without significant reform." Caleb, the most empathetic, held Aisha's hand. "He's trying, Mom, but 15 years can't be repaid over a few lunches." Aisha smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "How do you feel about continuing contact with him?" she asked. Michael, speaking for them all, replied, "We'll keep in touch, but on our terms. Not for him, for us. We want to understand the whole story." Daniel nodded. "Complete data is always better." Caleb added gently, "I don't want him to think he can reshape who we are." "You are our family, Mom." Aisha pulled them close, eyes glistening. She said softly, "I'm proud of you for choosing understanding over bitterness." After they left to work on a new school project, Aisha returned to her laptop to review quarterly reports. LearnSphere continued to thrive with a new European contract and projected 12% growth next year, but her thoughts drifted to James. That morning's paper had reported his resignation as CEO of Bennett Tech under shareholder pressure. The company was on the verge of a takeover. The photo accompanying the article showed a man aged by regret, silver hair, hollowed cheeks, a far cry from the confident young man who once told her she didn't belong in his world. She felt no satisfaction, only quiet affirmation that her life had eclipsed his, not just in success, but in meaning. Stepping onto her office balcony, Aisha gazed out over the Chicago skyline. This city had seen her cry in alleyways after being cast out of James's tower, pregnant and penniless. Now, she stood at the summit, not just as a successful Black woman in tech, but as the mother of 3 exceptional young men. With his sharp mind, Michael received an internship invitation from MIT. Daniel, a national math champion, was developing a new algorithm for LearnSphere. Caleb, her gentle artist, had designed learning interfaces for disabled children, now used in 28 countries. They were her legacy, not James's. Returning inside, she opened an email from Robert Carter, her longtime mentor. He invited her to speak at an international conference in Singapore, where LearnSphere would be honored. "You are a symbol for the new generation, Aisha," he wrote. She smiled, remembering when she declined an invitation to his daughter Emily's engagement to avoid seeing James. Now, there was nothing to fear. She typed her reply. "It would be an honor. LearnSphere will bring something extraordinary." That evening, Aisha returned to their suburban home. Her boys were in the kitchen eating pizza, a tradition from their toughest days. "Mom, I fixed the bug in the language module," Michael said, showing her his laptop. Daniel said, "I calculated that Singapore will increase our revenue by 15%. Caleb slid a drawing across the table. "I designed a new logo for the conference. What do you think?" Aisha laughed and hugged them. "You 3 are the best team I've ever had." After they went to bed, she stepped into the backyard, looking up at the star-filled sky. She thought of her 24-year-old self sitting alone on a park bench, pregnant with triplets and cast out by the world. That girl had turned pain into purpose, built an empire from nothing, and raised 3 extraordinary humans. James Bennett, the man who once called her ordinary, was now a faded footnote in her story. She whispered to the stars, "The future belongs to the Thompsons, and it's brighter than ever." Aisha returned inside, opened her journal, and wrote the final line. "Today, I realized that victory isn't defeating James. It's living a life where his absence can't dim our light. My sons and I, we've already won. She closed the journal, placed it beside the family photo, and smiled. Their journey, born in the heart of a storm, had brought them to a new horizon.